Hi, my name is Kevin Smith. I'm the Director of Product Development at PersonalFinanceLab. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about best practices for gamifying your classroom and why it's more important than ever if you're working with distance learning or a blended classroom environment. So a little bit of background about me. My background is in economics. I was a researcher in game theory before I joined PersonalFinanceLab, and I've been working with both the PersonalFinanceLab team and the rest of and all the teachers we work with to basically identify the best ways to use game concepts to improve learning outcomes in the classroom. So I'm going to cover three main things. The first is what does it mean to actually gamify. This is a big buzzword in education and everything else, and it has been for the last few years, and there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily true coming out from a lot of the popular media. So I'll cover that briefly. Why it matters with distance learning. This is a very important topic right now as more and more school districts are looking at a blended model for the fall. So I'm going to talk about some of the main applications there, especially with engagement. And at the end, I'm going to talk about what we at Personal Finance are actually doing about it. So the resources that we're developing to gamify the different concepts of learning and teaching in personal finance and business classes. So first, what is a game? So before you can gamify something, you need to understand what you're trying to do. A game is a structured form of play, and a play is a range of intrinsically motivated activities. So what that means is that if you have a game set up, the people who are participating in the game have a goal that they're working towards, and the way they're trying to do it is kind of built into the game itself. So there's a clear goal. The people who are in it intrinsically want to move forward. It's not something they're forced to do. And what this really means is that you would set up a game and you put rules that define the incentives. So in other words, the types of rewards, the types of things the students do to get to that win state is what you really want to focus on when it comes to gamifying. It's not necessarily putting in rewards like bonus points or gold stars, although those do help. But generally speaking, it's just a structure where your students go from A to B in a form of structured play where you set some rules. So in other words, your classroom is already a game, whether you realize it or not. The types of summative assessments you use define what the win state is for the class, which generally would be higher grades. The way you grade the kinds of assessments you give out are the rules of the game. But just because you do have it defined as a game doesn't mean it's engaging. This is where gamification comes into play. So this is one of the most important concepts to understand whenever you're talking about trying to gamify your classroom, is realizing that your classroom already is a game. All you're trying to do is make that more obvious to the students. And what that means is, just like any game you would play, a board game, a video game, or whatever, you do the same kinds of things throughout, and you can always see that what you've done in the previous turn of the game impacts where you're starting for the next one. So building that chain of progression is one of the most important parts of gamification. So what it means to gamify is to bring elements of those games in. It doesn't necessarily mean making it fun, but that usually is one of the goals of it. Points and achievements and things like that can help. Like I mentioned earlier, the gold star on a piece of paper, it can help. It is more of a signification of progress than anything else. It really means giving your students a win state and a sense of progression. So the sense of progression is probably the most important part of anything you do with gamification, which means that everything they do, the student can see very clearly that it's leading to the next step. And if they do well on this first part, it's going to help them have an easier time when they come to the second part, so they're not catching up. And if you really want to have a good gamified classroom, the really core of it is having long-term projects that build up over time depending on what you're covering in class. So the more you can do to chain the whole class together within one clear picture, the better it is. That's not even with gamification, but that's what gamification really is all about. So this will be more clear as I get into the individual steps that we take to give teachers and the kind of tools that we develop to get towards it. But in the end of the day, the key elements here are the win state and the sense of progression. Those two things are what you want to communicate to your students. What does it mean to succeed? How do you get there and make it so they can see that they're getting there almost in real time? Now, these concepts apply more when we're talking about distance learning than even when in the classroom. And the main reason for that is engagement. A well-applied series of gamification gives the students touch points that they can follow even if they're not sitting in the classroom. When a student sits in the classroom, their sense of progression is, I have 15 classes left, I have 14 classes left, I have 13 classes left. Not the most engaging way you can possibly do it, but at least it gives them that sense of progression, at least in some form. They don't get that quite to the same level when they're working in a distance learning outcome, which is why you'll want to add in more of those elements, more of those milestones. So it comes back to that core goal where you want to have the students following long-term projects that build up over time based on new concepts that you're covering in class. And this would apply to a personal finance class, an accounting class, and anywhere else. By having some core projects that they work on over time and they build up as they're learning new concepts, it prevents it from breaking apart where they're doing one assignment talking about one topic, they do a second assignment talking about a different topic. All of those things don't build into the sense of progression. It just jumps them from one item to another. But with distance learning, you do also have some advantages over the traditional in the classroom stuff. The students have more freedom to move at their own pace, which is a good thing for differentiated outcome, but it's a bad thing in terms of keeping engagement, because students who start to get ahead of everybody else can get a little less engaged in the classroom because they just don't need to pay attention as much. But using gamified elements can help them do that because it lets them go above and beyond the rest of the class without necessarily getting too far ahead. So the goal here, when you're talking about a distance learning project in particular, is that a fully gamified classroom would be using online games, activities, and other projects as much as possible, minimizing the lecture time. That way the teacher spends more of their time working with students one-on-one as they have questions. But using all of these little games, activities, other projects, but together making sure that it all works toward the same overarching goal. And as always with anything with distance learning and anything with teaching is the teachers have to be giving as much feedback as possible. And one of the things that I personally really like about using games specifically in the classroom is that it does give the students the more real-time feedback. They see if the games are set up properly, what works in the game is what you should be teaching. So by winning in the game, which is much easier to understand than winning the entire class, it builds on those concepts directly. And again, the longer term activities you can use, the better, where the students are keep coming back to the same concepts over the course of the semester and building on them. And really what this means at the end of the day is incentives. This is where the rewards, this is where badges, this is where all of the other stuff talking about progression is key, where you want students to have little bite-sized milestones that build up to the bigger picture. Now, this is not necessarily something easy to do. When we go back to the whole concept of your classroom as a game, this would be short formative assessments where you'd give the students little grades on one thing or another, making sure that students are getting at least something they're good at and doing a bit of differentiated outcomes. But keeping the incentives up there is what keeps the students interested. Making sure that they have something to show for it almost every single day. That is really the key, and that is what really drives the engagement. So on our team, this is where we come in, because we work specifically on these kinds of tools that let teachers do this. So we have three main branches. We have our budgeting game. In this one, the current version of the budgeting game, your class takes on the role of a college student with a part-time job or a full-time worker who just finished school. They progress through the budgeting game over the course of a simulated year, and you as the teacher get to control what kinds of events happen throughout that game, which means that you can align what happens in the game with the concepts you're covering in class. So as the students keep coming back to the game to progress and build up their savings and everything, they're also getting hit with events that are directly related to the kinds of things you're talking about in class. Our second is our stock market game. So your class manages a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds over the duration of your class. Now this is one of the best activities you can do when it comes to driving student day-to-day engagement, trying to get them engaged even outside of the time that they're supposed to be working on your class, and getting them engaged with the world around them and paying attention to the world outside of the narrow confines of what's happening in your specific classroom. Because they are forced to look at real companies and see how the news is interacting in the real world. And the perhaps most important part of what we do is our curriculum library, where we have a huge library of lessons that have little mini games, articles, videos, and things like that. You can mix and match them for your class, And these connect directly back to the stock market game, the budgeting game, to add additional milestones and incentives for the students to reach as they're progressing through your class. So our budget game and stock game work as the kind of long-term projects that tie everything together, while the curriculum library we have, you would be borrowing lessons from there that line up with what you're doing in class, so the students see the clear sense of progression of, I need to do these 5 articles, I can look at my stock portfolio and see my class rankings, I can move through my budgeting game for a month or so as long-term activities with it all building up together. So a little bit more detail on the budgeting game. The students play through a simulated year. And as I said, they can either be a part-time student or a full-time worker, and you as a teacher control everything about it. So how much money they make at their job, how much money they're paying in rent, what kinds of life events try to throw off their budget, all kinds of things. If I pull up the budgeting game here, you can actually see a bit of it, where when I go to start out the game, I have the checking and savings balance my teacher gave me to start with. I'm trying to build up my net worth, my credit score, and my quality of life. So this is a special kind of budgeting game where the students can't win by just trying to be cheap. They really need to focus on improving their quality of life, or their game score is going to suffer and they're going to drop out in the class rankings. And the class rankings is always one of the most engaging parts of it. So as a student, I'm choosing where I want to live, so how much do I want to pay for rent. I choose what kind of cable packages I want. I choose my cell phone plan and my grocery plan. So there's various levels they can choose here. What they choose will impact their quality of life as the game goes on. As they go through the game, there's mini lessons that pop up, inviting the students to learn a little bit more about concepts with credit and debt and personal finance. I happen to know the answer to this one already. Doing well in the game gives them that incentive. Their net worth improves, their checking balance gets easier, it all works out. As they move through the game, you can see here, on the 2nd of each month, my rent bill is issued. So my rent is due a week later. I need to make sure I pay that bill. There's quizzes built into it to get these students to get a little bit more, it quizzes them on personal finance and investing topics. At the end of each weekend, they're asked how they're going to spend their time, so they can earn more money at their job, they can spend time with their friends to improve their quality of life, they can take care of their chores, or they can study. When the students start their job after they've graduated school, how much they study determines how much money they make on that job. If the students don't take care of their household chores regularly, then their landlord will do an inspection and they're going to get a huge fine. If they don't work enough extra hours, then their boss might stop offering as much extra overtime, so they might have a harder time meeting their budgeting goals in months where money is tight. So every action the students take in the budgeting game has long-term impacts that go through the way the game will play out through the rest of the game. I'm going to do my chores this week, and I saved $74. So as the game goes through, like I said, they have those goals of trying to maximize these points, but they also have class rankings, or actually I'll show this first, where they need to build their budget and their monthly income. So it looks like I'm going to earn 180 times 4 is $720. The students see their bills that are coming up, but they need to guess at their variable expenses. So I happen to know it's going to be about $500 a month, and the students will get to learn that as they've gone through the game a few times, gone through a couple of months, and see what kinds of events can happen. And I need to set a savings goal, and I'm going to set a savings goal of about 10% of the income that I'm earning this month. So besides that, there's class rankings involved, where the students can see their performance compared to everybody else in the class. Both by net worth, which is what most students care about, credit score, which is really important. They improve their credit score by using their credit card responsibly, and their quality of life. All of this goes together to build their overall game score, which the biggest things to do is hitting their savings goals, saving regularly, and building their credit score. The net worth doesn't really impact it that much. Now, I know a lot of teachers here don't teach personal finance. We are working on an entrepreneurship version of this budgeting game, which we're hoping to have released for the spring. In this version, the student will be managing a small business, and the goal of that business, or the goal of the project, is to manage the cash flow of the business over the long term. We're hoping to have at least 3 different types of businesses. where the students would need to manage the marketing expenses, their payroll expenses, how many employees they want to hire, and the events in the game would impact the types of cash flow they would see one month versus another. Then our next stuff is the stock game. There's a ton of different settings, and the whole goal here is, again, it's a foundational activity. The teachers have the students return to this repeatedly over the course of the semester. It's all a real-time stock game with real-time rankings. If I pull up my stock game portfolio right here, you can kind of see I have 3 stocks in my portfolio right now. We put a lot of time and effort to make sure that students have everything they need in one place. So for example, if I go to make a trade, I don't know the name of a company off the top of my head. I can start typing the name, and we give the company symbols that match. All the research tools are built right in. There's different types of charts they can look at depending on how much they know about stocks. Down here, who is this company, what do they do, company news, what's Wall Street analysts saying about this stock, their price history going all the way back to their IPO, financial statements, income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement going back annually or quarterly, 20 years, and detailed quotes which have a lot more financial information. So any teachers teaching accounting and finance classes will get a lot more use out of the stock game than they might at the budget game. There's a ton of reports built into it. Students can see their transaction histories all the way through. If I place my trade here, gives me my estimated cost, I am asked to make a note of why I want to buy this stock, which you as the teacher can review and the students can review later if they need to make final reports. And because it is a real-time game and the stock market is open, it appears in my portfolio right away. Students can see their portfolios as charts, as lists. They can get more information on each stock they're holding. There's news stories down here talking about what's happening in the world. And again, our rankings page is probably the most engaging part of this, where there's a real-time ranking showing the students move over time. It looks like I haven't been added into it yet because I'm the teacher in this contest, and so I won't appear. But this all gets brought together with our curriculum library. And when I said that this is the important part of the building the incentives, this is really the key to it. We have over 300 lessons in our learning library, and you as the teacher would pick out which ones you want your students to do each week. So I'd say I want my students to do the stock game tutorial stuff first. And then I want to go in and grab a few accounting lessons on the accounting cycle and jobs in the accounting sector. If I pull up some of these lessons, one of my favorites is the bonds article. You can see here that these lessons don't take too long. There's articles, videos. We use some infographics. We use some little short-term mini games, and each one ends at the bottom here with an assessment. So 3 to 5 questions. They're not designed to be tricky, just to make sure the student read and understand what they're looking at here. As the teacher, you can choose whether they can retry those quizzes or you just save their grade on their first attempt. So you grab as many or as few as you wanted. You can set your assignments up with their own start dates and due dates. You can make it so students need to finish one previous assignment before they start the next one. There's a lot you can do with them. And then as a student, when I go back into my portfolio here, both on the stock game or the budget game, you can see on the right side of the page, I have an assignment that my teacher has set up for me, along with the countdown of how long it takes to complete. So as the students are working through their budget game activities or their stock game activities as kind of that foundation where it keeps them engaged over a long period of time, they also have these short-term goals that you set for them to accomplish this week or even today, and perhaps with a reward that would apply to either of those portfolios. Which goes to the last bit of what we do specifically to gamify this, is we have all kinds of stuff built in for students to reach a little bit farther. If I go back to my if I go back to the Personal Finance Lab, I have an achievements page where it has a bunch of stuff that it's challenging students to do above and beyond the core stock concepts of the class. As I earn achievements, I can choose one to make active, which is going to appear throughout the site as my avatar. So for example, if I go back to my dashboard here, it'll pop up on the side. It appears on all the rankings pages. If I switch to my budget game and go to the rankings page here, I can click on this badge. It shows the badges that I've earned. I can click on any other students' badges to see what they've earned. So it gives them a little bit of a kick to do a little bit more than you've asked them to do. But also, when you create your assignment, you can also say, when you create this assignment, we're going to give you a reward in your stock game or your budget game. So it's another one little thing saying, if you finish this on time, you get a little extra bonus, a little bit of extra cash, and it's better than the Gold Star because it impacts how their portfolio and how their budget game and how their class rankings in particular are going to play out over the long term. So I am just about out of time. You can find a little bit more information about what we do at PersonalFinanceLab.com. Our Facebook page has a bunch of t-shirt demos and invites, so you can check there for anything that if you want to get a preview of the site. Or you can email us directly at info@PersonalFinanceLab.com or Kevin@PersonalFinanceLab.com. So I hope to hear from you soon if you have any questions, and good luck with this semester.